especially when you want to work down there. Yeah.
We're going to begin. I'd like to welcome everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is a hopefully brief membership meeting, but we do have business to accomplish. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Carol Lakin. I have been president for 2 years, and I'm on the way out. This is the end of my 2-year term. I would like to point out that in the back, on the back table, there are sign-up sheets for the committees that we have created and the board has created. We really like to have members help us out and have active committees. So that's part of our new last 2 years goal, is to get people involved. When they sign up, they don't just come to meetings now and then, that we really are going to try to do some things that will be helpful to the historical viewpoint of the committee, of the community, and also to the running of the society. So the committees are landmarks, burial grounds, events, nominating, finance committee, and newsletter committee. And if that resonates with anybody, I hope you'll consider signing up. By January 1st, your dues for 2018 are going to be due. So our treasurer, Mike, or Doug, where are you? Right here. Standing in the back, in the yellow tie. If you wish to take care of that tonight, you're more than welcome. Anytime between now and January 1st. I have membership cards. If anybody hasn't gotten one, we started this a year or so ago. We're going to give you a card, and it isn't dated, and it just validates your being a member of the Historical Society. So if you haven't gotten one, come and see me and I'll get you one. Now, for bylaw revisions, I presume you all have a copy of the revisions. Anybody doesn't have one, they're right out there.
You need one?
Are there any? Yeah, okay. So I'd like to introduce the board, starting with our new, what will be co-chairman, Gail Boyle and John Fritz are going to be our co-presidents.
Only if we're elected.
If they're elected, yes. I'm just saying they're on the ballot. Yes. If you take a look at your ballot, and I'll just have you have members of the board stand up. George Magudician, he is going to be nominated for our vice president. Don Sutherland will continue to be nominated as treasurer. I am going to take the place of Gail as recording secretary. Mike Tripico will continue as archivist, if so approved. Peter Fellows and John Verney, Peter is, we will soon see, and Ray Valdonato, stand up Ray, yeah, are our trustees at large. So there you have the board, and this is the ballot that either can be filled in. Yes, does everybody have a copy of the ballot? Anyone need a copy? Oh, wait a minute. 3 people do not, all right? So as you can see on the ballots, the terms are 1 year or 2 years. And last time, the whole new board, which was needed to be elected together, every one of us has served for 2 full years. And we are all technically having our terms and going off. So we now want, with our new bylaws, we want to start staggering the board terms so that the whole board doesn't suddenly go off at the same time, that there is some level of continuity, whatever may happen. So that's why we have the 2 different years. The only term limit is going to be president, and no one can serve president or co-president for more than 2 years, plus be eligible for 2 more years. And then they have to be off for a couple of years. And that's just the way the new bylaws are written. So now we're going to vote for the new slate of board members.
If there are no nominations from the floor against the candidates on the slate, then I move that we approve the entire slate by acclamation.
Well, one point,
Yes,
please state that if anybody has any suggestions, that they can add them now.
this is true. No, that is true. It is written on here, as you can see, that if anyone wants to nominate someone from the floor that would be added in another place, you do have to have 5 other members recommending you, but you can be nominated from the floor. You can accept the nomination, or you can nominate yourself from the floor, and be on the slate, or be considered to be voted for individually. So if there is anyone, raise your hand, now is a good time. Otherwise, all right, I will accept
The motion to.
the motion. The motion was made and seconded, yes, thank you, to accept the ballot, the slate by acclamation. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And raise your hand. Yes, I should do this formally. All opposed? All right. And the ballot, this slate is accepted. Thank you. Thank you for it all.
We wanted to
Yes.
just
What?
recognize,
Oh,
we, 2 years ago, I don't know if you guys know, we were in a mess. We were mired. We couldn't make any headway, and we didn't seem to be able to get anything together. And we did have some very powerfully dynamic people working with us, and we were fortunate to have somebody of the caliber of Carol be willing to take on the president, because it's a tremendous amount of work, a tremendous amount of time. And she was able to know when to ride herd on us, and when to let us have our head and go ahead. And we've accomplished some astonishing things, we feel, that we never would have dreamed of before. We could not have done it without Carol, so we would just like to thank her.
Peter, that is. Thank you. That means an awful lot. Thank you. So, what I'm going to tell you now is that Peter's talk will begin in about 5 minutes, but we encourage you all to go back and get something to eat and sign up on the sheets that are on the table with the cakes and cookies, and then come back and get settled, and we will have a fascinating talk by Peter in a matter of 5 minutes, okay? Thank you all. Ready and in your seats, I hope. I'd like to tell you that our Historical Society has been doing a lot of cool and interesting things, and Peter has been largely a part of an awful lot of that in the last 2 years. Consider, if you aren't a member, consider joining us, and you will join in and see the kind of fun things that we do. As I stated earlier, with my term ending, I'm going to remain on the board, but there are a lot of other things than board work for everybody to do, so please sign up. We did get a couple of people signing the back sheets. There's a lot of room for a lot more names back there, so we ask you to do that. So, for Peter Fellows, his talk today has been culled from an awful lot of his archival work, and he's been with the Historical Society since 2010. He's been actively involved in several Historical Society projects. He has set up and maintains the Mamaroneck History Society Facebook page, if any of you are on Facebook. He has documented the history of Walter's hot dog stand in order to get it listed on the National Register of Historic Places. He discovered and uncovered the Washington Rock, which, as some of you know, is on Oriented Avenue near the old Washington Arms restaurant. Anybody's been around long enough to remember that? He located the original footprint of the Delancey house that is right here Anybody know that?
Yeah.
Some of you do, I know. That is on this property, and this is where if you think of how far up the hill we are from the post road, just picture moving the Delancey house by ox cart down the hill to the post road. Anyway, he had helped locate that, the footprint. He is continually researching early Mamaroneck history, and that includes the topic of this evening, smugglers, scoundrels, and LandSwindlers, the plot to steal Mamaroneck from John Richveld. I am happy to introduce Peter Phillips.
Would like just let you know that the Washington Rock was discovered with Bill Fraser's help. Without it would have been impossible. There's pictures of him going through the jungle to find it there, so that's for sure. And the Delancey house footprint is actually out here and a little to the left. John Fritz, my Tripico, were very, very involved in that. So it's not by any means me alone. So what we're going to talk about tonight is a plot that existed to try and steal from John Richveld Mamaroneck. It would have changed the way things had progressed from there. And what I'm going to try and do is interpret what happened for you. So the facts and some dates and stuff, if you're interested in things like that and where did this research come from, I can certainly talk to you about that afterwards. But I really want to give you a feeling for what happened back then. So I'm taking you back to Monday, let's go right, Monday, September the 23rd. John Richveld is in Oyster Bay, where he's a merchant trader. So he trades goods to other places, Boston, Barbados, Virginia, even Britain. And he often goes on those ships with them. But in Oyster Bay, he's also a landowner, and he's also a tenant. And the reason that he settled in Oyster Bay was because it's a known smuggling place. It was right on the border of New Netherland and what they called New England. All of Long Island, even Westchester Rye, was considered controversially part of New England. So the idea was that neither side had the money or the men to enforce any laws there. So Oyster Bay was a marvelous smuggling bay. But today he's on his way to what's now Rye, Nursing Island, to a little village called Hastings, which was settled about a year before by these three fellows, Peter Disbrow, Coe, and Studwell, who had come from Connecticut to set up a little place there and to buy some lands. And the reason he's going there is he's very interested in the last piece of shorefront property available in the area. You have most of Rye spoken for. It hasn't all been bought up yet, but they're buying it up. Pelham, Thomas Pell in '54, he bought all the way up to the what's now the New Rochelle Mamaroneck border. So the last piece of free property is here. And property is where it's at because not only do you hold on to it and it increases in value, but in addition to that, you can have people live on it and pay you rent. So it's a very powerful thing to do. So he's on his way there. And that's what he wants to do. He's closing his real estate deal. He sent a fellow, John Finch, well, he probably went with him, we don't know, but they went together in a lot of these deals. He probably sent him out to find who owns these three necks of land on the west side of Mamaroneck River. And they found it was this fellow, Wapaquiwam, who owned it, supposedly, with his brother, Mahatan. They find Wapaquiwam, and he says, yeah, you know, let's talk about price, and it's a good price. He goes back and tells his brother, and then he comes back and says, yeah, he's all for it. So they said, okay, we'll close on the 23rd of September, 1661. We'll meet at Nursing at Peter Disbrow's house, and we'll do this deal. So that's what they did. When they got there, Richveld gave Wapaquiwam sort of a down payment or a deposit on the property. a couple of coats, 10 shillings worth of wampum, just enough to say the deal's going through. And the deal was, the schedule of payments was, in about a month from now, I'll give you half of what we've agreed on, and then next spring, I'll give you the other half. This is not an uncommon deal, and I can give you later, if you want, a list of the things, coats and hose and stuff that they included. But the price was about normal for the time, and the arrangement paying later on was also quite normal. So nothing suspect there. Peter Disbrow was there. He witnessed it. His friend from Fairfield, Jonathan Lockwood, he happened to be there, so he witnessed it. Along with Wapaquiwong, wasn't Mahatan, he was still at home. We haven't seen him or heard from him yet. But Shenarockwell, or Shenarok. If you recognize that name at all, it's because Shenarok sold the land to Pell. He also sold land to Peter Disbrow. He had a lot of land. He's selling a lot of land, usually with his brother Ramaki, something like that. Also along for the ride was Kokino. Kokino wasn't even a Wekisgeek Indian, which is what the tribe was called that did these deals, the Wekisgeeks. He was actually Manhasset from Long Island, Shelter Island. But he was a power broker and a wheeler dealer, a real estate broker. He'd go around to all these deals on Long Island, and he would do the interpretation and stuff. He was involved in the Pelham thing too. He was involved in the Rye thing. As a matter of fact, John Finch, the interpreter that was along for the ride, he was at Pell too. So everybody knew everybody. These were not, except didn't know Wapaquiwong. He'd never seen him before. But they knew each other and they worked together on these things. So right after they've agreed on those details, they sail to Mamaroneck. And what they see is a small island, which is later called Hog Island, and later became part of Harbor Island Park as it was filled in. They see the water is clear. You can see the surface, partially because it's teeming with shellfish, and shellfish are a natural filter. They filter the water and make it clean. There's salt marshes, which is really good for your cattle. There's a lot of meadows that have been planted in the past by Indians. There's no Indians here now, so they're easy to cultivate. They don't have to chop down trees and that. And then high on the hill, there's a lot of forested area. As you walk along the bank of the Mamaroneck River, you come to, tradition says, a large flat rock. And thank you for the time. And this is where, according to tradition, Richbell signed the deed, and Wapaquiwong made his mark on the deed. And then after they signed it, they sent another Indian to blaze the markings of trees to show where the bounds were. They were 1.5 miles north of what was called the Westchester Path, which was an old Indian path, the Sakara Path, went all the way from Manhattan right across the river into Connecticut, territories claimed by Connecticut. And it crosses the Mamaroneck River at a little waterfall, which was shallow, so they could go across it. And that waterfall had a thing that at high tide, the water from the harbor, the seawater, came in, and then it stopped there, and the fresh water came down from the river and fell in, which led an English surveyor in 1664 to say the point where the fresh water falls into the salt water. And that's where that phrase comes from. So basically, if you look at a map and you see Griffin Road, that was about the border of Mamaroneck, the Mamaroneck River on the one side, and Stony Brook on the other, beyond which was Pell's land, now near Shell. So that was the boundaries of the property that he bought. He was given another right, and that right was to graze cattle and cut any timber he needed for 20 miles north of that. He wasn't given that land. He didn't buy that land. That was a right to use that land for grazing and timber only. Okay? The double cross, yes. So there was this fellow, 24-year-old fellow named Thomas Close. And Thomas was a seaman. He worked for John Budd, this very powerful person who was now horning into Disbrow, Cohen, Studwell's little game in buying up pieces of property in Rye. And he wanted to be a landlord. He wanted to be own property. He didn't want to be a sailor. He wanted to be big, noble, and well thought of. So he's over in Oyster Bay. He lived on the Nursing Island in the village of Hastings. And he gets to talking to John Finch, who had negotiated the deal with the Indians, and Henry Disbrow, this fellow who lived in Oyster Bay and was probably the brother of Peter Disbrow. And this is just before the deal goes down. And for some reason, maybe they were drinking, I wasn't there, so. They tell him, John Richbell and John Finch, they just negotiated a deal to get some property. They're going to buy property in Mamaroneck River. And then they go, oh, did I say that? don't tell anyone though. So Tom Close goes back home and immediately tells someone. And he does, you know that thing where you say, I'm going to tell you something, but don't tell anyone because it's a secret. They told me not to tell anyone. So what did you do that for? So he tells William Jones, who's this 17-year-old kid who also works for John Budd. And then he goes and tells John Budd. And John Budd's thinking like, look, we're buying up Rye. It would be great to have this land on the other side of the river too under our control. But he doesn't really have the money, I think, because he's just bought some land from Shannon Rockwell, and he's got more land on the east side, Rye Neck, what used to be called Bud's Neck, that he needs to get. So he can't commit any of his resources. But he has a fellow who he thinks could, and I'm pretty sure this fellow was staying at his house. His name was Thomas Revel, and he's from Barbados. And he's also a merchant trader, and so he would come to New England and he would do work here, trade here and stuff, and then he would head back. He was more than excited by this idea of buying up this property and adding it to their collection. Here's the thing. Just a month before, this is going to be September 23rd, August 5th, he was sitting down at the table with John Richbell. John Budd, John Richbell, and Thomas Revel, all sitting at the same table across from each other. And Richbell was serving as a witness for a deal they had with a fellow in Virginia. So that he's sitting across from him, and now he's going to try and knife him in the back. I don't know what happened there, although Richbell did have a temper, but for some reason he didn't care about him. So that was the plan. And what they do is they say, how could we get this land from him? And what they came up with was, the moment the deal closed, Tom Close, the young salesman, he went out to Cocono and said, listen, Cocono, talk to Wampakweewam, say to him, we'll give him more. Revel will give him more money. All he has to do is just make his little mark, still like a little C, on the document. And we'll give him more than he would get from Richback. Wampakweewam was reluctant. He wanted that. He wanted the money. He wanted the stuff. But he was reluctant. And he said, well, he gave me like a down payment, And they must have said to him, what? Just give it back. You still got it, right? 2 shirts, 10 shillings. It's nothing. Give it back. He says, well, you're supposed to come with the first payment 1 month from now. Interestingly enough, the deal that was signed with Revel was 1 month and 4 days later, which makes you think maybe they said to him, all right, let's see if he shows up, if you hear from him. October 27th, they hadn't heard from Richbell. It was a month and 4 days after the thing. And even then, Wampakweewam must have been nervous because Cocono takes the lead. And the document states, I, Cocono, Sagamore. Well, he's not big chief on this side of the pond. It's only on the other side that he has any status. But by virtue of the power given to me by, and they named 3 other Indians who weren't on the other deed, plus Captain Wampakweewam, they call him, do sell this land to Thomas Revel. And Cocono signs it, and Wampakweewam puts his little mark underneath that. And then Now there's 2 deeds for this land, Mamaroneck. These were very litigious times, and I suspect that Revel figured this will go to court. They did a lot of suing and stuff. And he would have said to himself, but you know, he failed to live up to the contract. Within a month, he didn't bring the goods, so I got a good shot at getting it. And I know some people, you know, in high places. The courts in Long Island, Westchester, Connecticut, and that did not practice a good form of law. It was more like backcountry law. So he thought he had a pretty good chance this would work out in his favor. Then he suddenly realized, gee, I sort of wrote the first document making Coconut like power of attorney for all these Indians, and I'm on their behalf. They've given me power, but he has no document giving him power of attorney. So he just close Coconut. Get the Indians back. So they get the Indians back, and they bring them back to the house, John Coe's house. Interesting. Studwell and Coe were in on this. You know who wasn't in? You know who wasn't invited in on this? Peter Disbrow. They kept him out. They didn't tell him anything. And another person, not as important perhaps, was William Jones. They didn't tell the kid anything either. So they must have felt these people would not be a part of this treachery, which speaks well for them. So they left them out. And they come back and they write a new document saying, oh, yeah, we give power to Coconut to sell the land. Yeah, we trust him. So now he has power of attorney and he has his deed. He thinks he's okay. Richbell sends words to Wapaquiwan, got the first half of the payment. Come on down to the rock, you know, the flat one, and we'll celebrate and you'll get your first payment. So he's over there with Finch and Griffin and there's probably some servants. And they're like hanging around. And these Indians are taking their time. They are not showing up. Where the heck is Wapaquiwan? What is up with this? So the weather starts to get bad. He orders them to make a shelter for him. And the cell phone reception is really bad. So they have to order out the food. So they send somebody over in the little sailboat to Nursing Island. I think they had a 7-Eleven there. Although many people think there was a Walters at that time. It wasn't quite that old. So. And when they come back, the guy with the food, William Jones, is the one bringing the food, the 17-year-old kid. And that's a big surprise. And he has a story to tell. He says, Revel, right at this moment, is on the Nursing Island, and I hear him saying he wants to buy this property here. Remember, Jones doesn't know that Revel's already bought it. That's what he heard, though. Because Revel goes over to Peter Disbrow's house, maybe just socializing. Jonathan Lockwood is there again. He's a frequent visitor. I don't know. Maybe he has no friends where he's up in Fairfield. And he says, oh, I'm buying. He doesn't say I bought. He says, I'm buying the land at Mamaroneck River. And Lockwood says, oh, you shouldn't be meddling with that because Richbell's already spoken for it, and I saw him get part payment. And Disbrow backs him up and says, yeah, John Finch, they've already agreed for that land. You shouldn't be anything with it. And Revel says, I don't care. I'm going to buy it, and we'll try for it later. He means they'll fight him out in court for it later. He's going to take that chance. So when Richbell at Mamaroneck hears that story, he gets a little perturbed. He jumps in the boat. Finch gets in. Jones gets in. I mean, this is great. This is really live action going on now. They sail over. They may have rowed over. They were really excited. And they land on the Nursing. And Richbell approaches Revel and says, listen, I hear you're going to try and buy this land. Don't you try and buy it because I've already bought the land. We don't know what Revel said. But it appears from the depositions that he left, leaving Richbell with the impression that he was intending to buy it, but it was not a done deal yet. So after he leaves, who should show up in the village but Wapaquiwan, actually with Coconut? This guy's supposed to be at the Mamaroneck getting his first half of the payment. Instead, he's at Wapaquiwan. I think he's panicking. And Coconut, he says, he's going to get he's got the payment. And I think Coconut said, we'll go down and talk to Revel at the Nursing, it'll be fine. They get there, they see Finch, who they know, and they see Richbell, and they're like, "Ooh, see if we can get away," you know. But Finch saw them, caught them out, and said, "What are you, ashamed? Is that why you're leaving? Because you're ashamed about what you're doing?" So they come over. Peter Disbrow herds them into his house. So we have at least Wapaquiwam, Pocono, Peter Disbrow, Jonathan Lockwood, he's around, William Jones, and then Finch and Richbell. And they say, let's get a few things straight. Do you own the land that we're talking about, these 3 necks? Yes, I do. And did you sell the land to John Richbell first? Yes, I did. Well, why? Well, Close and Pocono sort of persuaded me to do it. But didn't they give you a down payment on it? Oh, you could have that back. Richbell's like, no, I'm not taking it back. We have a deal. I want the land, and I brought you the first payment. Here you go. I'll see you in the spring. And off he goes, which is what I think we should have done. As soon as he leaves there, this is December 20th. We know this date for sure, Friday, December 20th. He takes Finch and Griffin, who is also an interpreter who is there, and he goes to Hempstead, Long Island. Hempstead, Long Island's definitely in New Netherland. So he's going to the Dutch authorities. He has 2 depositions taken. He gives a copy of the deed. Then he goes to Amsterdam on Tuesday because Monday he was busy. It was laundry day. And, you know, he has a modern family. And he applies for, it's called a ground brief and eventually a transfer. But anyway, he's saying, will you give me the title to this land? Will you recognize my title? And they said, yeah, we'll look into it. You haven't paid everything yet, but we'll look into it. Well, Revel hears about this, I suppose, because he shoots over to Southampton, Long Island, and he files his deed and his power of attorney. Now you see what's happening here is John Richbell is saying, well, New Netherland owns this territory, so it makes sense to apply to them. And the Connecticut people are saying, like, oh, no. This is all going to belong to Connecticut or New England anyway, so we're going with an argument there. That's where we're going to court. So that's what they did. You like that picture of Amsterdam in the winter? It's very nice, right? He's putting up a sign saying cookies are outlawed. Well, people kept giving them to the Indians. He didn't like that. That was a natural rule they had. I wrote about it on the thing. So along comes the spring. It's time for Richbell to make the second payment. Goes across the Sound again. He's still living in Oyster Bay. And he lands at the Rock. And he's waiting around again. And he says, you know, I'm going to sit down Wapaquiwam and I'm going to tell him a thing or two. Because he now knows from Wapaquiwam that Revel was fronting. He knows the land was sold. Revel has a deed. He knows that. It's not just a plan. Revel didn't tell him that, but he knows from Wapaquiwam. So he still wants to yell at Wapaquiwam. He enjoys that type of thing, yelling at people. But he ain't going to get his chance, because Wapaquiwam has no intention of coming. None whatsoever. He must have said something to Mahatahan like, well, you know, I went down, made the deal, and I picked up the deposit, showed him the land, and I got my first half. Now, if you want your half, you're going to have to get it yourself. He never told Mahatahan anything about Revel and all this other stuff. So Mahatahan is like, coming along, coming down. Hey, what's up? And they're like, boy, what is this? You sold the land to Revel and that? He says, I don't know what you're talking about. So again, they said, you are co-owner of the property. Yes, I am. And you sold it and gave the right to sell it to your brother to Richbell. Yes, I did. Because I'm here, Richbell said, to settle and plant the land. He says, well, you have the absolute right, but I know Wapaquiwam got you upset, but do I still get my thing? Because I didn't get any money yet. So they give him the second half of the money. Off he goes. He then takes his crew. He takes Finch and Griffin, and actually Jacob Young, a Swedish lad, came with him at this time. He takes them up to Stanford, and he has them give depositions there in Connecticut. He also has Peter Disbrow go to Stanford and have it done, and Jonathan Lockhart, and William Jones, Lockwood. I think that's it. So everybody who is involved does a deposition over the next month in Stanford. Now, you might wonder why he switched. It could be something as convenient as thinking that Disbrow would be happier to go to Connecticut. But you know what I think it is? Rich Bell's brother, Robert, was on the Council of Trade. This is a powerful council formed by Charles II to take care of trade in the Americas. And they planned to take over New Netherland. And I think that Rich Bell knew it was coming, and he figured, so this will definitely be Connecticut then, and so it makes sense to go that way. That's not what happened, but I think that's what he thought. The Dutch are happy, yeah, there's depositions, they seem fine, we'll look at this, and they give him in 62 the title to the land, so he now has a Dutch title. Over the next few years, because Rich Bell's a litigious son of a gun, he sues Revel in different courts throughout New England, by which I mean Connecticut, Long Island, Westchester area. And every time he does, he wins. He's a big cheese, and he wins. But Revel knows Winthrop, the governor of Connecticut. And he has a friend, because he's in Barbados, but he has a friend called Giles Sylvester, who just a few months ago loaned Governor Winthrop a very large amount of money. So Giles writes to him and says, you know, my friend, poor Revel, he's a good guy. This Rich Bell fellow, he's a bit dodgy, you know, you should watch him. Revel's worried, because how is his case going to go ahead when he's not able to be here? So I know, as a personal favor to me, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, you will make sure that if the case is coming up, you rule in his favor, or if you've already ruled, that you have an appeal so that my friend Revel gets the land that he so richly deserves. That was in September 1664. Why is that an important date? Because at the same time, the English captured New Netherland, and just a little segue here, two of their agents crashed or got shipwrecked in Piscataway, which is in New Hampshire, or was. It's a different name now, I think it's Portsmouth. And they sent to Boston, where they knew that Rich Bell was doing some business, and said, King Charles is asking you to get a horse as fast as you can, and to ride back to your home, and to tell everybody along the way who you think is favorable to the English cause that we're coming, and we're going to take over this place. So Rich Bell was very well known to the powers that be. And as soon as they got the land, it was given to the king's brother, James, Duke of York, hence New York. And they sent that surveyor, who had a poetic license going on there, and they made Mamaroneck the border between Connecticut and New York, so Winthrop's power wouldn't have been of any use. Mind you, I should also say that in 62, Winthrop made Rich Bell the constable of Oyster Bay. He liked Rich Bell. He got along fine with him. They were good friends too. So, but nevertheless, that was dashed, the hopes of that. Revel says, well, wait, it's New York now. Okay. Connecticut doesn't count. Nowhere else counts. All that counts is New York. So I will take this case to the Supreme Court, which in this case was called the Court of Assizes, which used to meet once a year. Governor resides. It's the last thing you can do. Once they do it, that's it. You're done. It's November the 4th, 1667. He doesn't show. I don't know. He doesn't even have anyone represent him. Governor Nichols calls up the Indians. It says many Indians. I don't know what he thought was going to happen, but he got a bunch of Indians together, including Wapaquiwam and Shenarockwell. And he says to Wapaquiwam, was Richbell the first person who spoke to you about this land? Yes, he was. And it's the only testimony given by Shenarockwell. That's right. That's right. That's my man. That's right. And then Wapaquiwam said that yes, he did do that, and but you know, I took him to the land. I showed him the land. We agreed upon the land, but he didn't come up with the money on time, so I sold to the other guy. You know, because they sort of persuaded me to sell to him. He says, well, wasn't there a down payment? Oh, that wasn't a down payment. This is the annoying thing in research. The explanation of what it was, instead of a down payment, according to the Indian, we don't know, because the words were like messed up and scribbled. But he was saying it was for something else. Perhaps because I came down and showed him the land. After all, he paid that Indian who marked the thing 2 coats, 1 shirt, and some wampum, so that's what that was. They said, well, here's the thing. October 27th is the date that Cocono sells the land to Revel. But he doesn't have any power of authority at that time. He doesn't have any authority to do it. The power of authority is on November the 11th, 2 weeks later. So that's not good. That doesn't help with this deed. So the deed's invalid, and Richbell wins. And that's how that story ended. Let me just tell you what happened after. You know the story behind the story? Revel continues as a merchant trader in Barbados. We see him in the records at Shelter Island ordering barrel staves to ship sugar and molasses from the Barbados. John Budd continues to buy out Mamaroneck. The reason I included this is, you see at the bottom it says the mark of Shenarok, Sachem. Well, and it says Shenarok, and there's a little after of. That's the mark he made. You'll also notice William Jones has his mark there. That's why it's significant that he wasn't included in the secret Revel deal, because he's on other documents signing as a witness. It's not just because he's so young. And it also says witness above William Thomas Close. That's poor spelling, but that's what that word means. It's kind of difficult, but after a while you begin to read that. So those are real people. That's a real document that survives in Rye. Thomas Close, he kept the money. He and Cocono, they split all the money Revel gave them for the Indians, the proprietors of the land. They kept it. They split between them. And he bought land in Greenwich and became one of the 27 proprietors. And you just notice, actually, as an aside, Jonathan Lockwood was also one of those. Cocono kept going. He was a real estate agent. He was doing good. He was all over Westchester, and his last deal was in Bedford in 1695, last that I can find in the records, which would have made him about 75 years old. Yeah, he didn't suffer. Wapaquiwam, even Mahapahan, we don't hear about anymore. They just disappear from the records. I might find the names vary all the time because it's phonetic spelling, but I haven't seen anything decisive. Richbell sells his Oyster Bay properties. You see his little name there, Richbell. And there's Nathaniel Sylvester. He moves to Mamaroneck in 1666, which is 5 years after he bought the land. John Finch, he moved to Connecticut. Edward Griffin moved to Queens. And Henry Disbrow came to Mamaroneck. That's Henry's house that he built. This shot taken in early 1900s, I believe. He later sold that, got a condo up in Mamaroneck Avenue, the Avalon, very nice. Richbell sues his neighbor, Thomas Pell, over a meadow, and this is the document that made by the government official who was trying to figure out what was going on. The interesting thing is they're having this huge fight, right? They actually found a tree, and on one side it said TP was cut in it, and the other side it said JR. Wouldn't that be like a clue? But they're like, no, well, I wonder where the line is, right? But, they kept going. Governor Lovelace, who was after Nichols, ordered Richbell arrested for debts owed in the city of New York in 1671. I found no information on how it was settled, but in 73, when the Dutch come back, hey, we're back. You guys out of the fort, we're taking it over. It didn't last too long, but he stayed at Rich Bell's house. This is a house from the 1700s, just to show you what it would have looked like. These are not actual pictures taken at the time. He continued to sail as a merchant trader, even as he got older. He took trips to Jamaica and Barbados and that. He harassed his tenants. There's some very interesting stories about that. He loved his wife, doted on her and his stepdaughters, was very, very kind to them. And he died about age 69 in 84, right when he was in the middle of a lawsuit with Rye, because those Rye people were always trying to get land that belonged to him. In this case, White Plains. Because what happened, which I will tell you, when Lovelace gave him the actual patent, he didn't say 1.5 miles above the Westchester Path. He said 20 miles back. He misread the document, which is why it's so important to read these documents carefully, okay? Because you end up, in 20 miles, you're already at the Hudson River, you're at Chappaqua up there, it's a long distance. And that's the end of the story. But I'll tell you something. The story of Mamaroneck continues. The things you are doing today, the things that you are involved in now, this is the history of tomorrow. They'll be looking back, and the things which you did, you know what Grandpa did, you know, he did this, that. This, you are living this now. If Rich Bell was here, he'd be like, yeah, what, I'm buying some land. You are the history of Mamaroneck, and when you go out and when you vote, and when you volunteer, and when you research, and when you do things, you are leaving a legacy for your great-great-grandchildren, for your neighbors that you do not know who are yet to come into Mamaroneck. So I do encourage you, get involved, have some fun. Thank you.
Questions, Peter?
Sure.
Yes, could you discuss a little bit, what was the administrative mechanism for recording deeds? It sounds like even back then it was, you know, kind of more well-developed than I would have expected for the 17th century.
Yes.
Who ran it?
Okay, so you could go to, there are different courts of session. You could go to almost any town and record things. The records for Revel, for example, are in the records of the town of Southampton from 1665 onward, and that's where I found those. They were recorded there. That deal with the Virginia salesperson is a fellow named, I think his name was Jim Cooper, who was the lawyer for James Mills, and he was also in the records of Southampton. The records of Hempstead hold the stuff which was brought in by Rich Bell. All of that stuff was taken to New York for the Court of Assize, because that was where they were held at first, and is now on file in Albany in their historical records section.
But each town then was responsible for administering the property rights and transfer of title.
So you say that like somebody told them to do it. It's more like they just took it on themselves. I mean, what are they doing recording a mortgage on property in Virginia, in Southampton? So some of it was happenstance. Why is the Mamaroneck deal that Rye had not in, that Revel had in Southampton as opposed to Stamford? So it's a lot of give and take. It's loose. Remember I said how they weren't really courts like we know them? They were kind of, yeah, come on in. We'll write it down. Good. Yes.
I have two questions. Did I understand that Mamaroneck at that time was only the land to the west of the Mamaroneck River? That
Yes,
was
3
something
necks.
that we're talking about?
Yeah, 3 necks to the west of the Mamaroneck River. The first one called Keka West, the second one called Mam Gates, and the third one they didn't talk about.
And is that big rock
Large
still there?
No, but in the 1930s, they put up a sign saying, near this location on a large flat rock, the deed was signed. So, and the waterfall isn't there either, the crossing of the path.
It would be around Harbor Island.
The crossing, no. You know where Tompkins Bridge is? Between that and this little print shop at the bottom of Prospect, somewhere in there is probably where it was. Yeah.
Yeah, Tompkins Avenue is an old Indian path, supposedly.
Yeah, there was, it's wider than the spot further down. That's why I'm beginning to think the spot closer to the mouth might have been it. But yeah, it was the old post road, that's for sure. Yeah. Yes.
Would current life be significantly different if it had gone in the other direction, other than instead of Richville Road, we'd have Rebel Road or something like that? I get the battle over property rights, but was there anything else that you picked up that might
It might
have
have been
changed
called
things?
Rye.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Can you imagine that?
It does.
There would have been no Larchmont because that's the third neck, and Revel was only claiming the first two necks.
Wow, okay.
I think that's about it.
That's pretty significant.
Yeah,
though.
yeah.
So now Rhinebeck was Bud's.
Bud's neck. Yeah, he
Bud's
owned
neck.
all that. And unlike,
Dingo Point.
no, that would have been the original guys. Disbrow, Stowe, and Co. bought those points together. They brought different parcels at the same time, but they always did it as a team. Bud did it on his own and wouldn't share with them. Yeah, well, see, yeah. Yes.
In any of your research, was there any discussion at all about the Indians' right to sell the land?
See, that's an interesting thing because, I mean, if you look at it, the government was willing to take Wapaquiwam's word that he was selling it on behalf of Mahatahan, right? But they wouldn't take Kokino's word that he was selling it on behalf, you know. So it's very confusing. And how come there were 3 Indians whose names we'd never heard of now show up as selling to Revel because they owned the property, but they weren't in the original deed, although with the Richbell deed, although it does mention and other Indians. But so it's a very strange thing. And Shannon Rockwell is in almost every single deed throughout West Farms. He's like all over the place. Why wasn't he for this little section here? So it's very confusing that.
Were they Sagamore Indians?
No, that's a term that a Dutch cartographer gave to the Indians. The nearest they think is it might mean the Southern Indians, those other guys. But there's no contemporary document when the Dutch are here or the English take over which mentions anybody called Siwanoy. To the contrary, there's tons of them that say the Wickersqueak Indians, which is Weckeskeek Indians. So it seems much more like, and they were up in Greenwich, and they were all the way to, these Indians lived along the Hudson River, it said. So, yeah, I don't think there were any Siwanoy.
That's what they say, you know, like Indians by Larchmont Reservoir, they would say they're Algonquin speaking Siwanoy from the Wappingers tribe. So that's not true.
A lot of it is Europeans trying to reverse engineer a foreign culture so that it makes sense to them. They weren't really interested with these deeds in going to the Indian later and saying, look, you find on the deed here. It wasn't for them. The European philosophy was, we own this land now, but the Indians who are on it can sell their areas. But because we want peace, you have to come and register with us, and we have to say, yeah, you can do it. And we want to see that you paid the Indians and the Indians are happy. But we own the property now. So it was a strange thing. And the Indians, didn't always call themselves by names, not like, hey, we're the wolves, yeah, go wolves, go. It wasn't really like that. Many places across Canada and America, you translate the meaning of the Indians' name for themselves, and it's like, we're the people. That's where the phrase came from. These are my peeps. That's where it came from originally. Yeah, little known fact.
Were the Mohican Indians only confined to upstate? Because every now and then I'll hear something about a Mohican in Westchester.
Yeah, they were a really tough upstate tribe, and they would come down and whoop the local Indians,
Oh,
and
okay.
so they would pay them tribute.
Okay.
So in some senses, this tribute thing's also very confusing, but in some senses, some of the Indians considered the payment that they received from the Europeans for the land, not the sales price, but a tribute. Yes, settle here, grow your crops, graze your thing, and you pay me. And there's recorded histories in Mamaroneck where they've come back later and said, you know, the guy who gave us some money, he died now, so you're the new guy. Yeah, but I'm his son. No, you pay us some money. And Caleb Heathcote was famous for doing that. He wanted to make sure all the Indians were happy, or whatever few were left.
Was Rhinebeck called that when John Budd was buying it?
Rhinebeck? No. That would have been, I think it was Aposwami or something like that. That's a little outside of what I usually deal with. But no, they had an Indian name for it. But I'll tell you, KK West is from Revel's Deed, okay? And I found one source which says it means other side. So you just get the picture of the European going to the Indian. Well, what do you call the land on the other side of the river? The other side? Oh, KK West. Ooh, that's a great name. But and there was a Mamaroneck River. It was called Mamaroneck, but there was no real name, I don't think, for the land. Anything else? Very good. Well, you've been a fairly good audience.
So much, Peter. That was fascinating. I want to announce that our next event is going to be Sunday, December 10th, and we're going to have a holiday sing at the little schoolhouse at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And there will be some flyers and hopefully publicity between now and then, but mark your calendars. So thank you all for coming.
This is great. Yeah, it's fun.
Will all board members come on up front for a picture?
All right. Well, I'm there you go. All right. So I'm going to hand this over. We can easily I think so. Take another one.
Okay.
Thank you. Good. Now, I'd love to have one on the phone. Yeah. Actually, I mean, I can do mine too. The rest camera, yes.